Oh, the snakes crawl at night. That's what they say when the sun goes down. Then the snake will play. Saw a shadow slip away from my house. So I hurried straight and looked in her driveway. But I found out that it was my love inspired. Oh, the snakes crawl at night. That's what they say when the sun goes down. Then the snake will play. Oh, the snakes crawl at night. That's what they say when the sun goes down.
Okay, this guy's name is Nick Mero, and he married my aunt, and she is my mom's sister. So Eric is a tall man. He's about 6'4" and 300 pounds. Around the late 80s, Eric worked collecting money for the Los Angeles Police Department. He had a call center, and he had telemarketers that would spend their days calling and trying to collect donations. I don't know if they were calling businesses or individual households, and they would try to collect money for the Los Angeles Police Department, and they also had benefits to do this. And I remember one of the benefits had to do with the World Wrestling Federation, and WWF, of course, is the staged wrestling matches that they have on TV. So they had a benefit to raise money for the LAPD, and this took place one summer when I was visiting California. So my aunt drove my mom, my little brother, and I over to a coliseum near LA, I guess, and they had a wrestling event to raise money. So I was talking to a family member recently, and I brought this up, and I asked them, when Eric worked at this business to collect donations for the LAPD, he must have either been working for the LAPD himself, or he must have needed a bunch of permits from the government having to do with oversight in order to do that type of work. And they said the only thing they heard was that Nick Mero bought a private business that collected donations for the LAPD from an older Jewish guy. So Eric had worked for this guy for some time and then was given the option to buy the business. And my family member said as soon as he bought the business, it did not do too well over the subsequent years after Eric bought it, due to the fact that the LAPD began to lose public favor. And they said due to reasons like the Rodney King situation, where a bunch of police officers attacked a guy and they beat him very badly, and everybody complained that the cops were using excessive force, to say the least. And this was happening all over Los Angeles. The police were very ruthless, and there was police brutality happening all over that city. So after some time, nobody wanted to contribute money to the LAPD. So eventually he just shut the business down. But understanding a little bit about common sense and how the government works, I don't think that just anybody can start a business. Like, I can't go get an LLC and then walk around to everybody in my town saying that I'm collecting donations for the local police department. And let's say I raise $10,000 and then I go give the police department, what, 100? And I keep the rest for my salary? So my guess is that Eric was working for the government or for the LAPD himself. But Eric was the type of guy that would leave out many details about himself. He did not like to talk much about himself. So I heard from different family members at times that Eric wasn't doing so well financially. And when I asked them what he did for a living, they said that he operated a few businesses that seemed to be something that wouldn't generate a lot of money. And I said, like what? And they said he ran a popcorn stand. He sold popcorn. And then they went on to sell spaghetti noodles at country fairs, and where you would rent a booth and then you would sell your products, like at farm markets. And they sold dry spaghetti noodles. So different people in my family remarked that it must be hard to make a lot of money doing that, selling popcorn or selling spaghetti noodles. But Eric always managed to have money somehow. And he drove a large Hummer. And I believe Hummers originated as vehicles the military used in the Middle East. They're extremely large, wide SUVs. And they really stand out on the road when you see a Hummer go by. And their Hummer was a bright yellow. And that was how they got around Southern California. And Southern California is notorious for traffic. You spend most of your time on these highways that are jam-packed with traffic, and it's just stop and go for miles. And I believe they said that that Hummer got something like 14 miles per gallon. So it was terrible on gas, but still, they continued to drive that. Eric really liked that vehicle, so he wouldn't trade that in for something more economic. Eric also liked Rottweilers, and he would show up at different family functions with his dog, and he'll put the dog in a dog crate. So that was Eric's thing, and often brought his Rottweiler with him on his trips. So Eric was also something of a big drinker. He liked to drink vodka, and when he would show up to family functions, he would bring his own bottle of vodka, and he would pour it into water glasses. So it looked like he was sitting there drinking a glass of water, but it was vodka. And he obviously had a tolerance. So I remember only having one conversation with Eric, and I was visiting California and staying at my mother's house. So I guess I was in my mid-30s at the time, and my mother was having a party, and she had 20 or 30 people over, most of which were family members. And they were cooking Spanish food, and everybody was having drinks, and everybody was hanging outside on the patio and back of the house. So Eric Mero, he waved me over and said, "Sit down and talk to me, John, and tell me what you know. Your mom tells me that you make videos on YouTube. What are they about?" And I said, "Well, basically all sorts of things. The last video I did was about martial law, and it kind of dramatized what it would be like if there was some sort of economic collapse and the government had to declare martial law, which meant rounding up certain people, evacuating people from certain areas, and putting them into FEMA camps." And FEMA stands for Federal Emergency Management Agency. And I said, but I do videos on all sorts of topics. And I asked Eric if he ever heard of Alex Jones or Prison Planet, because Alex Jones seemed to be one of the more well-known reporters that covered issues such as martial law or economic collapse or military control over the U.S. So I asked Eric if he heard of Alex Jones or the Alex Jones Show, and he said that he had, but he could not remember the exact show or what he heard. So looking back, Eric acted in a way that suggested someone who was a salesman or someone who was used to directing the conversation by putting all the attention on the person that they were talking to and never discussing anything personal about themselves. So I did not especially like the conversation that I was having with him because it seemed more like an interview. And oftentimes when he would ask me something, he would then seem to daze out and look at me like he was looking right through me, or he would look like over my shoulder, and he appeared to daze out like he was daydreaming. So it didn't appear like he was really listening to my answers. So I kept my answers short, and then when he would realize that I would get quiet, he would kind of sit up fast, snap out of it, and then ask me another question. So at that time, I just thought that Eric was something like a bullshitter, and he was feeling good because he was drinking, and he just wanted someone to BS with. But I didn't like the fact that he didn't appear to be really listening to the conversation or adding anything to it. So after about a half hour, I just made some excuse to end the conversation and walk away from him. But the one thing that stands out besides this is that he used a phrase. Did you ever think about getting off the grid? And I said, off the grid? What does that mean? And he said, go into an area, like a remote or rural area where the government cannot track you. Because it was important for him to eventually get off the grid. So I told him that I did not have plans. I never thought about getting off the grid. I lived in the city of Waterbury at the time. And the only thing that Rachel and I did was put away food, water, and supplies in case there was something like an economic collapse. But we had no money or plans to go move anywhere. So I have heard this phrase, get off the grid, a couple of times before. And get off the grid seems to be a term or a phrase that's used by government people. And it's something of a trigger phrase or something that has an alternative meaning. I guess it is supposed to provoke some sort of idea in someone that they are addressing. And I heard this phrase a lot before on a obvious disinformation website called Project Camelot. And they basically would interview 100 nuts who all had disinformation about secret government programs involving the military bases. And the woman who ran that website, named Carrie Cassidy, her favorite catchphrase was get off the grid. And I was under the impression that there really is no getting off the grid. The government could simply track you wherever you go. They could send agents to follow you. They could tap your cell phone. So there really isn't getting off the grid. And also I had a person leaving several comments on my YouTube videos. And they called themselves Do Not Be Deceived. And their icon, their picture on YouTube, had an owl with an orange sun behind it. So they were kind of marking themselves with occult symbols. And they were leaving comments on several of my videos. And so I responded to one or two of their questions because they seemed intelligent. And they sent me a personal message saying, I have some important things to say. Would I ever consider meeting with a lot of other like-minded people somewhere off the grid? And I said, off the grid, like where? And they responded, the Burning Man ritual. And I did not like the sound of that. So I said, no, I don't like the idea of hiding from people. And I do not believe there's a way to get off the grid anyway. Because if you're placed on a Patriot watch list and you're under surveillance, they could pretty much follow you wherever you go. So I looked up the Burning Man ritual, and I forget in what state they were having it, but it was about to happen in the next month or two. I believe it was over the summer. And they showed that they basically light a giant effigy of a man on fire. So it looks like a wicker man, a giant man that's made of wicker or hay or some other flammable material. And they light that on fire. And they have some photographs on the internet. And I guess these effigies are 20 or 30 feet tall. So it looked like some sort of Illuminati ritual. And this was one of the people saying that activists should go to the Burning Man ritual to get off the grid. So when Nick Mero suggested that I should do something to get off the grid, it reminded me of these two other people that said the same thing.